My name is Barclay Rafferty. I am one of the new owners of the Garden District Bookshop here in New Orleans at the Rink at 2727 Britannia Street. We are so excited. We've been around for the past 3 months. My husband, Christopher, and our good friend Carol Gelderman. And I bought the bookstore about 3 months ago at the beginning of February, and we have been just making everybody crazy as we run around like chickens with their heads cut off. But we have also learned so much, and we're so excited to welcome two wonderful friends and authors to the discussion today. Today, I'm going to first introduce Taylor Brown. He first published his book Fallen Land in 2016. His latest book, River of Kings, was published in 2017. I just have to double check that. Correct, Taylor?
Mm-hmm.
And he's a fellow Southerner and contributor to Garden and Gun, the New York Times, many other wonderful publications. And he tonight is really going to host our conversation with AJ Gnuse. AJ, did I get that? Did I get that right? Okay, good. Well, the two of them are going to talk about AJ's latest book, which I had down here, and they popped away. So Taylor, I'm going to lead it to you. Girl in the Walls, and we are so excited to hear more about it. You guys start and talk and go ahead, and we're going to have a little Q&A after.
Thanks, Barclay.
You're so welcome.
Thank you so much, Barclay, for that introduction. And I'm just thrilled and honored this evening to introduce AJ and talk with all of you. I see some familiar faces and some faces I haven't seen in a long time, and I'm excited to see. And I'm really, really excited to talk about Girl on the Walls. First, I'm going to give you guys a little bio on AJ Gnuse is the author of Girl on the Walls, which debuted in the UK as a Times bestseller. He received an MFA in fiction from the University of North Carolina, Wilmington, and was a Kenyon Review Peter Taylor Fellow. His writing has appeared in The Guardian, Gulf Coast, Los Angeles Review, Passages North, and other venues. A native of New Orleans, he now lives in Texas. His novel, Girl on the Walls, I have to tell you guys, this book really, really just staggered and amazed me. I loved it. I've never read anything quite like it, so I'm really excited to talk about, the background of this novel, how it was really built and where it came from. I love the characters. I loved Elise. I loved Eddie. I even came to love Marshall. And so let's get into it. Adam, do you want to read a short selection before we kind of get into the conversation, and then we'll kind of start with some questions and stuff?
Sure, that'd be great. Yeah, and I just want to say I'm so excited to do this. I'm a huge fan of Taylor Brown's writing and Taylor Brown as a person as well. So I'm just absolutely excited to be kicking off this book publication with you and with Garden District Book too, which, as someone who's from New Orleans and has bought a lot of books from you guys, it's kind of a dream come true. This is really cool. But yeah, I'll go ahead and start just reading. I was kind of juggling which passage to read, and I thought, why not just kind of start at the opening just to get the sense of where this book kicks off. So Girl on the Walls by me. Subject, you are not alone. Listen, we know there are people who hide in our homes. They crawl into attic spaces, tuck themselves behind yard equipment in garages, flit between the rooms of the house just outside the reach of sight. Some of us have found nests tucked in the backs of bedroom closets behind the hanging clothes, or in the void space beneath the stairs, in that sliver between a living room sofa and the wall. We have found half-empty water bottles and candy wrappers and the remains of leftover food cooked the day before. I have found my own wrinkled clothes pressed flat to the floor and stinking like somebody else's sweat. Look in the places behind furniture, the spaces beneath beds, every deep crevice of a house. No guarantee that once one place has been checked, someone will not sneak right back into it. You can stay home all day and still not find them. They are clever and patient, and they know the insides of your home better than you ever will. But you have to find them. You have to root them out.
Thank you so much, Adam. I think that was a perfect kind of introduction to the book. And really, introduces something that I found so fascinating, which is this world just beyond the world, right? And this idea of these spaces around us that are maybe humming with something that we sometimes can perceive and is not quite there. Um, I'm curious about kind of the origin story of the book. I mean, where and when did this novel come to you? Did it start with a character? Did it start with a house? Did it start with a space? Did it start with a story? Where did this whole book start for you?
It started with a conversation with a friend. This was back in, I think, about 2013. We were driving down. It was my friend Jake Nesbitt and I were driving down St. Charles Avenue. So all these beautiful overhanging live oaks and all these massive houses that are just each their own work of art and so striking and strange. And he was talking to me about how he'd been watching these videos about finding, like, they're presented as nanny cam footage or just house security systems where they find people in the middle of the night coming out of like pantries or like coming out from the cupboard beneath the sink, and they come out and they get what they need and then they go back and they disappear. And sometimes the person themselves looks totally innocuous. It might be just a young person or just someone who's not trying to creep around. They're just doing what they need to do to get what they need. But it's absolutely terrifying to see this. The strange thing about this conversation was that like hearing my friend talk about these videos that were creeping him out and making him start to think twice about the noises in his own home. I wasn't scared as much as I was like incredibly relieved, because I'd grown up in a house where there was all these strange noises and I thought it was just, that's just my, me being ridiculous, and being able to share that fear or that just, that anxiety with someone else and think like, oh, wait, like I'm not alone in this, really struck me. And I wanted to write a story about like people who can agree or have that kind of conversation about what if there's something in your home. And I've written a short story that got picked up. And then a few years later, I wanted to kind of explore this idea further. And I was interested in the idea of like, what if it's not, or what if the creepy thing in the house is not actually all that creepy? And I think when you set it up like that, you get much more focused on how people experience houses and these noises, and less about just, oh, there's a monster coming for us.
Right. It really struck me. I mean, I have to say that sense of, this relief of sharing that with someone. I know that, my house growing up, I felt it wasn't a particularly big house, but it did have 2 stories, and I would be upstairs by myself and I would hear things, and it seemed I would have this feeling like the house had something alive in it in and of itself. And then I talked to my mom who, when she was a young girl, they moved into a house that half of the house was being redone and had not been finished, and they didn't have the money or the time to redo it. So it just stayed cut off. Right. And she would go sneak into that side of the house, and it scared. I mean, to this day, it still scares her to think about. Right. But I don't know, really all that struck me. And I think as I've told people about the book, they've had their own stories to bring from the house that they grew up in or wherever they grew up sometimes. And maybe it's the overactive imagination of a child, but, we're so, I feel like, connected to the spaces where we grew up and if, to some degree, and that's really part of it. Was there a house in your childhood that like, did you grow up kind of in the same house? Was it in New Orleans? Was it an older house? Was it similar to the house in the novel?
Absolutely. I do want to say it will not top half of a house being closed off and just living in this, that is the coolest and creepiest thing I think I've ever heard of, or like a living arrangement. That's fascinating. Yeah, but I grew up in a house very similar to the one in the novel. It was kind of a fixer-upper, where it had a lot of different people's love and creativity working into it, and it had a lot of void spaces. It had a lot of strange noises. It was set where it still is there, but it's right across the levee from the Mississippi River, and there's all sorts of weird acoustics that happen. So you can hear cruise ships going up and down the river, and you can hear their music playing, and sometimes it sounds like it's playing inside your house, or people walking up or riding horses along the levee. Them talking can make it sound like it's coming from a closet which is
Right.
terrifying when you're
Yeah,
alone and you're like, the closet's talking.
absolutely.
But there's so many, it was this kind of, old plantation style house that was an amalgamation of a bunch of old buildings. We absolutely thought it was haunted. My parents, like my dad just called the ghost Henry, and just, we dealt with it like that.
Yeah.
And even to this day, the poor folks still live there. It's a lovely house, but they're still there. There's still like thumps in the walls that they're just like, yeah, that thumps every time, every day. We don't know what that is, and we just got to cope with it.
Right.
Yeah, but it's a beautiful house, and I love it absolutely. And it's creepy, but it's weird to kind of love an object that is creepy, that takes care of you at the same time, and
Yeah.
houses you.
You captured that in a way that I really felt, and it was timely for me. I have to say, I did a road trip in February, and I actually flew to Texas to pick up this old van and this old camper van. And I was driving back, and I decided I wanted to stay in um, Defuniak Springs, Florida, right, where I'd had some friends that had stayed there, so it was an interesting little town. I love old Florida and that kind of thing, and so I found the old Defuniak Hotel, and I checked in, and I really learned that I was going to be the only person for the night, and the guy he asked me what room I wanted, and I said, well, I just don't want one of the haunted ones. And I was kidding, right? And he said, well, then you know the history of this place. And I said, well, no. Um, you know, and he said, and it turned out that, people paranormal, crews come here to film and all this stuff. And I heard some things, and it was my first time really hearing something that, and experiencing something that was very frightening, and that I can't explain. And at the same time, didn't feel as scary as I expected it to. It felt like an old place that a lot of people had heard those same sounds, and had kept a lot of people had good nights of sleep there. And it didn't feel negative in that way. And you did something with that with this book, right? We think about places that are haunted, or we think about energies or the past and the houses and the layers. And sometimes we give that a really negative connotation. And you didn't do that here. That isn't the negative kind of force in the book, I would say. And I thought that was a really beautiful thing, and something that really appealed to me in the book. I'm really curious about the structure, because the structure of the book is fascinating to me. They are largely short chapters. They're named chapters, which is something that I love. But also different fonts are used in the book. You have, largely it's told from the third person, pretty close third person, but you have chapters that address the reader in second person. You have chapters that almost read like messages on a message board. You have, and it works together so well. And I'm fascinated about whether that was something that you outlined ahead of time, or that was something that was intuitive, or it was a hybrid, and how, did you have to rearrange things a lot, or did that just kind of come together? Tell us a little bit about, the process of the formation and the structure of this novel.
Awesome. Yeah, I'd be happy to. I'd also just like to point out real quickly that you just blazed past the fact that you spent a night in a haunted hotel alone, and you heard things
I did.
that you have no explanation for.
It was a little freaky. I have an essay coming out about it soon.
I am excited.
Mainly, I can laugh about it now and tell the story, but it was a little freaky.
I'm frightened. But yes, yeah, and I'm looking forward to that essay. So in terms of the form, and thank you for that wonderfully close read to see all the different directions this book goes. It was kind of an idea from the beginning. Like, something I wanted to do was kind of experience houses from all these different perspectives. You've got, the majority of this story is told from the perspective of a girl who's living in the walls and in the attic and sneaking around. And I wanted it to be kind of, in a very environmental book, which is looking at the ecosystem of a house from all the different perspectives that happen in a house. And we're used to the one we have, which is kind of mapped out. You just experience it through your routine, where it's, you get up in the morning, you do your stuff, you go through your track, and then you go to bed. but there's so many different ways, and there's so many, like, if you think about a lizard living in your walls, how is that experiencing your house? It's also their house, or the lizard's house too, or, you know, termites that are kind of weaving in, or spiders, or just people outside the house who don't necessarily live there, but, you know, we like to think these houses are just these complete divide between the environment around it and the house inside, but it's clear they're much more porous and they're much more representative of the environment as a whole. So yeah, I wanted a book that that's part of the reason I kind of fell in love with the short chapters for this book, not just because they're suspenseful and you feel like you're getting a lot done when you're reading short chapters, which is wonderful. Yep. And I love that. Yep. But also because you can kind of compartmentalize these different sections. It allows you, you know, it's easier as an author to kind of go like, okay, well, now I'm going to look at this room from the walls or from the closet, like how is that how's that experience kind of going, or how do you experience this room from someone listening from the attic above? So that really helped me just change, you know, camera perspective a lot.
It's interesting because it to me it's like you took the structure of a house in some degrees, not just the house, but the things who live and are part of that house. And that was the structure of your novel. And I've never really quite seen something like that before. And so I found that fascinating. And it had me thinking about our house here in Savannah, which is not a really old, like New Orleans house, but it's old enough that there are things living in it besides us, I think, you know, that we hear in the attic or running across the roof. And and there are, and some weird thumps. And then, you know, crawl spaces that the dogs, you know, we're here in my office, right? And a couple times a week, the dogs hear something and end up staring at the floor because they hear something down in the crawl spaces, right? And that idea that this house isn't just our house, it's the house of all these other, you know, people that lived in it before and their memories still reside here. They have memories of it, and then all the other creatures, right? And we are so you know, egocentric that we think of it as our house and we only see it in what we see, and we don't also see those void spaces. And you take us into the void spaces that we don't see very often, right? And I was thinking about how in the house I grew up in, my mom had this little sewing and ironing room that was off this closet, and from there it had these tiny little doors that went underneath the eaves, and they were like little kind of spooky child-sized doors, right? And you went up under there. It's kind of like being in the attic, the slope ceiling, and we just kept junk in there, right? Like Christmas decorations, old art projects. I mean, it seemed very much like some of the spaces in the house and in the novel, and they were such fascinating spaces to me sometimes. I mean, I could go in there. I remember being a child and going in there and closing the door and just sitting there in the dark and listening to it, you know, and it sounded different than the rest of the house. The muffled sounds. I mean, it was its own space that we rarely go to, right? And it just reminded me of the margins, I guess. You know, we talk about, you know, marginalized people and spaces that are marginalized, and you go into all that in the house right around us. And I found that just really, really fascinating. And I want to talk about the characters a little bit. I want to know kind of where Elise came from, and let's talk about Elise. And I really want to talk about Eddie too. I really liked both of those. I loved both of those characters, and I wanted to know if you know, kind of where those characters came from for you, and that, you know, what were their kind of origins with you.
Yeah, I think my kind of experience and my interest in those characters were I thought they were a really good kind of vessel to experience the thing you were talking about, like that weird eaves and the place underneath the eaves, and then closing the door and then just experiencing this place and just feeling it. Because I mean, where else in the world is there something like that where you know, you've got a crawl space, or you've got an attic, and you just kind of sit there in that quiet, that strange place that's a part of the place we know better than anywhere else. And I guess my homework assignment to everybody here is you got to go to like a closet or an attic, and you just got to sit there alone for a while and just see how you feel, you know, just experience it. Yeah, but for Elise and Eddie, you know, I think every author, like we're taking parts of ourselves and but also there's a part of them that's uniquely not us as well. So for Elise, I mean, it really started in a really kind of just technical way where I was like, what's the kind of least intimidating person that could be living in these walls? And I was like, an 11-year-old girl who's just been through a lot. You know, it's I think it's, and we wake up in the middle of the night, we hear the bump in the night, and we're like, oh my gosh, there's someone here. But then we don't often think about like what kind of person feels like they need to be here, especially if they've been hiding all day. Like what what's going on with them? And yeah, I wanted to lessen the fear of this, and I wanted to kind of take the trope of the bump in the night, the girl in the walls, and then turn it into something that's much more complicated and strange, where in many ways, like she's the one you're worried about throughout this novel, and Eddie, who's in many ways he's an autistic 13-year-old boy. He's much more in tune with what's going on here. He's the first one to become aware that that there's someone in the walls, and he's also someone going through a lot, and he's quite isolated at this time from his family, from school. He's trying to grow into a man or whatever that means, but he's trying to figure that out, and it's really difficult for him. He's hearing these noises, and he's partly afraid of them, and he's also smart enough to know that this thing is not necessarily that intimidating. I mean, if it could hurt him, it probably would have at a certain point, but it's still really frightening. And the book has a number of twists and turns where it's not just a story of a simple friendship. There's a lot of things coming, but yeah, I absolutely fell in love with these characters. It's a book that is primarily told through the perspectives of kids or people just on the cusp of adulthood, and I thought that was kind of the way to go, just from what you said, where it's we experience houses when we're young so different as adults, and I think we still do experience them in the same way as adults. Maybe we've just got a lot of other things mixed into it, but there's that really kind of primal and magical, and just I don't know, it's houses are so much bigger than us, and that really is evident when you're a kid. Yeah, so yeah, go on.
Keep going.
No, that was it.
It just, it struck me. I think about, I mean, people ask me, when I decided to be a writer, those kinds of things. And in my mind, I tell them something that's true about telling stories when I was a kid and all that. But those stories came from me spending, when we're kids, I think we have time where we're not doing anything except for, and maybe this is being lost today. I do worry about this with, some of my nieces and nephews and things like that, but because they're so busy and they have so much on their plate. But when I was a kid, there was so much time that was kind of dead time where you're occupying yourself, and then you have this relationship with the house that no one else has, because you're sitting there listening to the house and experiencing it. And that's where my stories really, I think that really came from. And I love that you took the kind of the idea of a ghost story, right? A very old, not trope, but a certain kind of story, a certain genre, a certain narrative, and you turned it on its head, where we have this empathy with the character who would be thought of as the girl on the walls, the ghost, the poltergeist, or something along those lines, right? And it's really, really sweet. And then Eddie and his relationship with Marshall was something that I really love, because you have Eddie who has his own kind of troubles and is very isolated. As you said, I thought maybe he was, on the maybe autistic or something on that spectrum. And then you have Marshall, who has his own problems, but in a very kind of like more orthodox male way of like being in high school and wanting to be normal, and having this, worried about his little brother coming into, his school and being so strange. And what allows him to really connect in the end to some degree, without having any spoilers, is as Marshall starts to realize that there are thumps in the walls, and that his parents won't believe him in the same way that Marshall kind of doesn't respect what Eddie, says and feels to some degree. And that ends up being this bonding element. Do you have siblings? Was there a relationship in your kind of upbringing, without getting yourself in trouble, that kind of, with them that was part of that relationship, and how that came about in the book?
I have a brother and a sister. I'm a youngest child, and
Mhm.
I think my relationships with my siblings inform, all of my writing and like pretty much all of my experiences. I feel like with Marshall and Eddie, these were really, you know, kind of selfishly, some of these characters were just very much parts of myself that were kind of coming into these characters, and then parts were just people I hadn't met yet. It was kind of fun to imagine. The house is slightly different, but it was kind of fun to imagine what happens when the next family after my family kind of disappears moves in,
Mhm.
and how are they experiencing, how we touch the house. So I loved these kind of rhyming elements, for me and my family. But yeah, it was kind of fun to kind of encounter this new object and experience him the way Elise does, because Elise is a girl who was the previous family who was living in
Right.
this house, and then this new family comes in and moves all the stuff and paints all the rooms and just changes things and takes away what she's looking to keep there, which is the memory of her own parents who passed away.
Right.
So yeah, I'm kind of in this weird, state where I'm like, I'm kind of feeling like all of these characters and looking at them and just kind of feeling a little crazy doing it. But
It did. I
but
mean, it comes across so well. It doesn't seem to me, sometimes when people will write these characters that are very informed by themselves, and it almost seems like a little autobiographical and like they're, what I'm saying? It never came across like that to me. They were just, I love these characters and the kind of connections between them, the whole ecosystem that you create. It really felt like an ecosystem. The house, the characters, all of it. It was like this microcosm all, together. Um, and the character I'm interested in is JT, which has to me kind of like he has echoes or elements of something monstrous, and I wanted to know about where JT comes from and kind of your your thoughts on that. He to me is a much more the monster of the novel than whatever is, uh, thumping in the walls, right? And he, to me, seems like this force of, in some ways, very human, right? Wanting to tear open the walls and find whatever the mystery is. He wants to see it. And the second that he sees it, you have this feeling like, with so much, right? Like if you find the mystery, if you actually seize it, it disappears.
Mhm.
And it really seemed like that Elise knows that, almost like she can't be seized by this force, and he is that force that wants to tear open the walls, that wants to almost burn the house down just to find whatever is inside. Where did JT come from you?
So yeah, so for those who aren't familiar with the book, the passage I read at the opening is a message from JT. He's this kind of frightening presence who thinks that there's people living in many people's walls, and he needs to find them. It's something he's compelled to do. JT, like the others, and this one's, I guess I'm not as proud to say it, comes very much from me as well. Like I think he is this monstrous presence that I have in myself. I wake up in the middle of the night and I hear that noise, and I'm angry. I want to get up there and I want to, I don't know what it is, but there is something, really satisfying to whatever's scaring you, this kind of abstract thing. Like just imagine like punching it in the face. Like,
Yeah.
but that's pretty monstrous in its own way. You're the frightening thing in that moment. So yeah, I wanted to kind of put that part of myself that I'm like, okay, I really relate to this, but at the same time, it's not something good. It's not something kind. It's not something empathetic. It's fear turned to anger. And I also like felt he was this kind of weird metaphor for what we're doing as readers and what I'm doing as a writer in trying to root Elise out of the walls and find out, okay, so what's your story? What are you doing in there? What are you doing at every moment? I have to understand every single thing. Was that noise you, or was that noise something else I've got to worry about? And what are you going to do, at the end of this book? Where are these kind of these threads? Where do you come from? So yeah, it's this kind of like hunger we have to discover the unknown, and part of this book is really just trying to realize that we have to come to terms and accept that we won't know things, and that's scary, but we just got to be okay with that.
Right. Yep. I really felt that about him. It's almost like he felt to me that he was kind of representative of this compulsion we have to uncover every mystery and to define it and to articulate it and to put it in a box, to put it in, you know, almost to capture it. And then we lose something really kind of, I think, magical. We lose something really beautiful maybe when that happens. And Elise seems to me like that kind of thing that, you know, is at risk of, you know, almost being discovered, you know, or being at the moment she's discovered, she ceases to be to some degree. Um, I want to know about a little bit about your process. I mean, this is kind of a little bit selfish for me, but I'm always interested in other authors and how books are written, and I think it's fascinating, you know, at the different ways people, the disciplines that people create or the lack of discipline, and how they go about it. Um, you know, as you were writing this book and now, do you write daily, or are you one of those, you know, writers that just only writes in the middle of the night when they, you know, feel the drive to do so, or do you show up at the coffee shop at the same time every day? You know, what's kind of your process?
I know you're absolutely a copy shop writer, and
Yeah.
I'm hoping you've got a new one from Bespoke. I'm sure you're missing that. Yeah, so I'm very much just like, gosh, it's all just kind of brutish and ugly and sweaty, and yeah, I'm very much, I've been getting up at 5:30 in the morning and just trying to get hours in, and a lot of bad days and some days that are, you know, better. I realized something this week, and I was actually really curious what if you did this as well, because you're a really lyrical writer, and your books are absolutely beautifully written on a sentence level, as well as just, you know, the stories themselves are just these really epic, you know, wonderful constructions. I realized that for some of the time, and that's you know, I'm striving, I really want, you know, the line to be beautiful as well. That's something that's really important to me. And I realized for the first time that, like, some of the sentences that I write, I know what they sound like before what the words are. I'm like, and I'm sitting there and I'm actually like mouthing them out, like, And like, I want that, you know, those double stresses at the end of it. That's what
Yep.
this line needs to be. I don't care what it says, but it needs that, and that's what needs to be communicated. Do you do that as well, or?
It's fascinating that you asked that, because I haven't talked to that many other writers that feel the same way, but it's like that for me. And it's strange because there is some kind of when it's going, for me, there's like some kind of rhythm that I can't fully define, but is there, that the words need to match that, and down sometimes to the syllable. And the weird thing is that, you know, you would think that that's almost like you think of lyrical, you think of music, that's almost a musical thing, but I'm almost tone deaf. I have no musical ability whatsoever. I mean, I I was sent to the principal's office when I was in elementary school when we had to try out for a musical, and the music teacher thought I was making fun of Amazing Grace when she asked me to sing it. And they sent me to the principal's office. That's how off key I was, that she thought I was doing it on purpose. And yet, when I work with, like, I was just doing copy edits on my latest book, and you know, the copy editor will want to change something really small, and I'll think, no, well, it can't end with a one syllable. That sentence can't end with a one syllable word. Like, I need it doesn't sound right, right? Like there's some kind of rhythm or flow there that um doesn't ring true, unless, you know. And I don't even know, I mean, it's one of those things that I find fascinating, and yet at the other hand, I don't want to like dig into too much, because I don't want it to go away by knowing too much, which circles us back to kind of some of the mysteries in the book, I think, you know. And the idea of, you know, whether we rip away the walls to see what's really back there, or not. I love the book on the line. I mean, that's something that for me, I mean, all of my books that I feel like that I end up really loving are books that where I, you know, that really do something with the prose, that really try to get a lot out of the line. And you did that so well here without it being even what, you know, I know that I go overboard sometimes, you know, and here it was just, oh, it's just right. I just loved the prose in it. I love the rhythm. It was just, and you did such a good job, because there are these very different characters in the book and chapters that are told in different ways, and that can be tough to meld all of that together and still have something that has that lyricism to it. And so I just love that part of it. And another thing that really struck me was the atmosphere that you build. I've told a couple people, I feel like this book is so atmospheric. It's like you can almost breathe it. You can almost breathe the dust in the walls. You can smell the smells. You hear the muffled sounds of what it, of life going on outside the walls and Elise inside them. Um, did you really want to have that level of, did you really try to create that atmosphere, or was that something that just kind of happened? I mean, how did that work for you?
First off, thank you. That means a lot, especially coming from you in terms of, the lines, the language, and the atmosphere as well, because you're an incredibly atmospheric writer, and that means a lot to me. I get the impression that, and I'm the same way, and I get the impression about you where, when you're thinking of the idea for a story or a novel, that like the setting is pretty much there at the beginning. It's not like, oh, let me think of this place, and then along later in the line, where should I put it? It's like, no, it's the fundamental part of what that story is going to be. But yeah, just for the atmosphere, it's something that's absolutely important. It's what I seek out when I'm reading. I really want to be sucked into a place, and it doesn't matter if it's the South, the American South. It doesn't matter if it's like a fantasy world. I want to be there, and that's something I look for. Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of, when I'd write these short sections, the first thing I'd be thinking is like, okay, let's live in this place and then see what's going to be happening in there as well. So atmosphere, absolutely. I think it's I really, kind of hope and pray. I want this to be kind of a book that's about an environment, about the coastal South, which is, experiencing massive coastal erosion, as well as all sorts of damage, and this home that I'm worried it won't be there in 20 or 30 years. I wanted it to be a love song to this place and to this house, and to the relationships that are in the South and in the swamp and that are in this house. So that was just equally important to me as honestly as Elise's story, of her having to cope with the loss of her parents. This was about me having to cope with the potential loss of an environment I love.
I think it's something that anyone from the coast these days, that's another reason it struck me, is that I'm from a different coast than Louisiana, from New Orleans. I mean, that you're on the coast of the Mississippi, and this is south of New Orleans, right? And in a place that really is disappearing to some degree before our eyes. That storms seem to get more powerful every year, and this is something that I've thought about a lot, that when you're on the coast these days, there's this feeling that, is this even gonna be here? I have friends in New Orleans that worry, should they have bought a house here? I mean, is this when we're old, is that, are we gonna have to move away because this is almost going to be underwater at some point? And you I think really captured that really well, that feeling of being on that precipice, and of potentially losing your roots, the very foundation that is so important. And something else, I think I want to open it up for everyone else's questions here pretty soon. But first up, one more question, just maybe this is a little bit selfish, but I was really interested in all the Norse mythology that's in the book. So Elise takes one of Eddie's books, and it's a book on Norse mythology, and it's really a book that she returns to a lot and ends up having conversations with Odin in the book. And it was fascinating to me. I know that my partner AJ just read Neil Gaiman's Norse mythology, so I was able to talk to her a little bit about it. And we are big fans of the show American Gods, which brings in a lot of of the mythologies of various cultures, but is really big on Norse mythology. How did that kind of become such a big ingredient of the book?
That was one of the things that surprised me for sure. Like, I didn't expect going to this is like, okay, yeah, Odin, the Norse god of, like the All Father, or the one-eyed guy. He's going to be a character in this, and he's going to be maybe one of my favorite ones. And it's just kind of one of those things when you're going and you're like, why did I just put that in there? Why is Elise reading this book now? And initially I was thinking, well, I just really love Norse mythology, but it's stayed past all these different levels of revision because I really loved how it worked as kind of like a moral structure and for this book, because Norse mythology, it's the only religion I know, because it was a religion originally, where the gods all die, that there's mortality to them. You've got like a couple Greek ones that know what it's like to suffer, but all the Norse gods will suffer, and they're aware of that. And in a book about dealing with grief and dealing with the fact that everything you love is going to one day disappear, but still you're going to try to find happiness and love and contentment and satisfaction within that framework. I felt like Norse mythology was perfect for that. I love Odin as a kind of father figure that happens for Elise is able to find out of her own imagination, and I love that just as a framework for this book as a whole. You are someone that does this really beautifully. The kind of in your most recent novel, Pride of Eden, you do this kind of mythologizing of great beasts, whether it's lions or crocodiles, where you kind of I think you put them in their proper place above people, and you really show that like these are magnificent, almost like godlike creatures. And yeah, I kind of like to just turn this back on you just real quickly, but like, how do you view myths in your own writing?
Yeah, I think it's fascinating for me. I found them very comforting. I think, I grew up I grew up in the South with a Catholic upbringing, which is fairly rare. And there was something, missing with that to me, that I always had this connection with animals. And as I got older and these myths became very powerful to me. And when I was around some of these animals too, they activate a part of us that I think is lost these days. And we have maybe, as most of the kind of dominant world cultures, especially in the West, we've taken, the other creatures and put them below us, right? I mean, the Bible very clearly puts humans at the top of some kind of, of the hierarchy, and puts everything else below us, right? And that idea has always seemed a little bit wrong to me. It doesn't feel right. And I think that maybe a lot of problems that we have with the environment and with ourselves, can be related to that. It's hubris, right? It's that egocentrism that is such a problem. And so these myths that do that have always felt very like they're not fixing something, but they're bringing something back that has been lost, that is really important, right? And maybe in the same way that you're talking about, like with Odin, a god that knows what it's like to die is very interesting to me, right? And is the perfect force or father figure maybe for someone like Elise, someone that can really sympathize or empathize with her, a god that knows really what it's like to be human, to be a creature, an animal. And so I love the book. I want to open it up. I could talk to you all night with just us two asking questions, but I want to open it up to everyone else and let them ask some questions, and let's go from there. I don't know, Barkley, how do you want to handle this as far as the questions? Do you want me to look at?
I think the best way to do it is, if anybody has a question, please go ahead and unmute yourself. We have a relatively small group. It's a great group for a virtual event. So thank you all for joining us. But we have a small enough group that I don't think we're going to, everybody's going to go on the wild side. So right. Please wait your turn. And I do have a quick question to start off, if that's okay. I grew up in New Orleans. I grew up just a couple of blocks away from the bookstore. And so many of your comments, so many of the things that you've been saying have just taken my breath away. And I'll tell you very honestly, this book is coming home with me tonight. So I'm so excited about that. I was wondering about writing are you in Houston or are you? Yeah, so writing in Houston. Okay, so structural environment, the environment of your homes. The average home in Houston is so very, very different than the average home in a city like Savannah or a city like New Orleans. How did that inspire you or uninspire you, or kind of force you into the setting of New Orleans?
I see my fiance laughing just a couple of squares over from me. Yeah, so I wrote this book in a different house in Wilmington than the one I am in Texas right now. And yeah, absolutely. Like Wilmington, where I was at, which was on the coast, was pretty similar in some ways, but it was different enough, which, you know, I was able to kind of get some of the sensory details that I was experiencing around me and put that into the book, but I was also longing for home as well. Where I'm at right now, it's just a lot of longing right now. So it's very different. It's similar in the ways that I don't like. It's just as hot and humid, but it's not as home. I'll just leave it at that. And yeah, I mean, but at the same time, I'm working on a new project where I've just gone whole hog, and I'm like basically in the Barataria Reserve all the time. So yeah, it's much more a work of imagination, which, you know, the last year we've all had. It's been kind of nice to just get carried away by your imagination.
I think that's nice too. So with that, I will welcome anybody who is interested to go ahead and open up their microphone to a question that they have. So I'm going to mute myself.
I have a quick question. Hey Taylor, how's it going?
Good.
I have loved this conversation. I love talking about haunted things and creepy houses, and especially children in that context, because I think they have a kind of awareness that we lose as we grow up, and I mourn that loss. But I'm curious to you whether you have books that you particularly love that have child protagonists that you would recommend to the rest of us, particularly authentic feeling, or that take you back to that vulnerable place.
That's a wonderful question. And yeah, absolutely. For one, just in a creepy sense, Shirley Jackson's "We've Always Lived in a Castle" with these kids, and I mean they're almost, you know, kind of above uber kids, like they're creepy and not quite children, but there's something beautiful about that still. The book that I think was probably the biggest inspiration for Girl on the Walls is kind of a strange one. It's Italo Calvino's The Baron and the Trees. It's about a man who climbs into, or a young baron in like 17th century Italy, who climbs into the canopy of a tree and decides he's never coming down again. And it's set at a time where I guess this is just how it was. You just got to accept it. All the trees were close enough where you can hop from branch to branch and actually get pretty far doing that. And it starts with him as a kid, and it kind of goes through his adolescence, how he does this. And it's really a book about, I think, about getting carried away with your love of art. That you can make a life, shape it however you want. Do the things that delight you, and just say no to what you don't. And you can find a really wonderful, successful life doing that. And in a way that Elise kind of turns, you know, the house into her forest. That's the big one I would recommend for that. Yeah.
I'm curious about your about the next project. You said the Barataria Reserve, which I don't know, but I'm guessing is related to the Baratarians of John Lafitte, the pirate
Yeah.
Lafitte. Is that, and I'm guessing, tell us a little bit about what you're working on, if you feel comfortable with it, and all of that.
Okay, I won't tell you too much because I'm afraid if the sunlight shines on it, it'll dissolve.
Yeah,
But,
exactly.
But I can tell you about the place though. It's a beautiful national park just south of New Orleans. It's somewhere I volunteered for about a year or so, working with some incredible biologists who just regularly go out there every day, and they're stepping over, like furious cottonmouths that are just foaming at the mouth, and they're just kind of stepping over them, going like, "Be careful, this one's furious," and then just continue to go. And I'm like scuttling around behind them, and wading in the water, and there's poisonous snakes slithering by, and they're like, "Don't get bit by that." And it's like, yeah, don't get bit by it, because we're like 30 miles from any antidotes. And they're like, yeah, that would be really bad for us. And they do it every day, and it's amazing. And it's this incredible, beautiful, strange place. And they're doing really important work in kind of figuring out how climate change has really mucked with our environment and all the things. And they're actively doing things to fix it out there. They're heroes. It's so cool.
And that's south of New Orleans, in the parishes south of New Orleans.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
It sounds like somewhere that I might like to check out, to be honest. Just,
Yes,
you know,
absolutely. Yeah. And if next time you come down there, just reach out and I can show you the best spots too.
Awesome.
Yeah, the idea of cottonmouths is exactly what I want to go check out every time I think about it. Well, Shirley, we have a little bit more time for a couple more questions. If anybody has any, just jump on in. I love that your discussion answered so many of the questions that I think our listeners and viewers have. And that's such a nice thing to see. So you two were really perfectly in conversation with one another. It was just a really wonderful match. So again, one more time, I'll give you guys a last chance for a question. If we don't have one, I will thank you.
Hi.
Oh,
Hi, I know you said that this was more of a love story for the house, which I love. Did growing up here, because I think I know, I'm also from New Orleans, we all kind of grow up with this is haunted and that is haunted and oh, there's ghosts over there, and like roll with it. That's just your city. Did you set out to kind of not change the narrative, but like be like, hey, the haunting can be beautiful. It's not necessarily scary. Is that something you wanted to do for people?
Absolutely. Thank you. And it's great to see you again. Yeah, absolutely. Because I think that's kind of how we experience our city. It's like, yes, it's haunted. That's not a bad thing. It's cool. Like, it's my home and I love it. It makes it better. Yeah. And it's actually frightening sometimes, but it's wonderful. And yeah, I did want to take that narrative and kind of shape it and show that, you know, the level of creepiness is absolutely delightful. I don't want to kind of push it too far into pure horror, because then I think that kind of shuts us down to experiencing places. But although some horrors do that really well. But yeah, I did want to do that. I think I love that. Thinking about like, that's how we experience our home. It's really cool.
It was crazy that for me, the timing of this book, because as I said, you know, it was close to my first experience, you know, and was really in February that I felt like I had my first real experience with this kind of thing. And this, you know, it freaks me out, paranormal stuff, you know. I mean, I'm kind of you know, I was a scared kid, you know, growing up. I didn't know what was under the bed or in the closet or in that kind of thing. I mean, I was fascinated by it, but it scared me. And there's something really wonderful and sweet and beautiful about turning that narrative around and having us sympathize with the other being what's in the walls, right? And it's one reason that I feel like this book is really powerful and really, to me, felt like it activated me on a very kind of root level. And I think that a lot of people are going to feel that way about the book. So I just think you've created something really beautiful, and thank you for it.
Well, I know I'm definitely going to give it to my mom, because there's an entire section of her home that she won't go into because she's just convinced there is something there. I think it's because she knows she has a lot of work to do on that particular in the particular room. But again, we've got a question.
Hey, I'm just coming in just to say I'm a super proud former teacher of this novelist, and I love the book, and congratulations.
Thanks, Brad. It's good to see you.
Anybody else have just kudos or thanks or just, I mean, anything to say to AJ or to Taylor?
Wow. Rock, AJ.
Yeah, this is a huge treat. I've taken classes with Taylor teaching and been in class with AJ, and this is just like, you guys are a great pair and class acts and powers on and off the page. This is awesome. It's great to see so many people on this that I also admire. So you guys keep good people around you. This is just great. Keep going.
Thanks, Nathan.
That's awesome. You guys have a great support system. I see lots of thumbs up from people who don't want to turn on their microphone, and I don't blame them. So once again, I really want to say thank you, because this has just been a really lovely evening that, to be perfectly honest, I needed at the end of this day. And I'm really happy for that. So I'm excited to go home and read this book because, as I have mentioned, I have not had an opportunity to. And I'm so glad to know that it has short chapters because I need that feeling of completion as well. Thank you all for supporting the Garden District Bookshop. Thank you so much to AJ and Taylor for being here and being in conversation with one another. I put a link to the book on in the chat, and we also have a number of Taylor's books in stock as well, and I can throw those links up as well in the chat once we are finished. As always, we have them in stock as well for anybody in New Orleans. If anybody wants to call in, say hello, come visit, you know, just come explore the Garden District, we're around. So thanks again. I really appreciate everything, and just thrilled to have you all here.
Well, thank you so much. I'm excited. You know, I have deep roots in New Orleans, and we didn't get to make it last year. Didn't get to see Katie, being one of my friends from New Orleans that I like to see every year, and lots of other friends. And so I'll be in there definitely next time that we make it down there. And just thank you all for coming. It was a lot of faces that was really, really nice to see, you know, that I haven't got to see in a long time. So AJ, I'm really proud of you, man. This book is amazing, and people are going to love it. And I'm honored that you asked me to be in conversation, and just congrats, man.
And thank you, Taylor. I'm honored that you be here, and thank you everybody for coming out. This means a lot to me. It's just been wonderful. Thank you, Garden District Books. Yeah.
Bye-bye.
See you guys.